Oh,
Oh,
amazing.
sorry.
No, it's not you, it's me. I think I sent you the wrong instructions. Having done this before, I'm clearly no expert. So yeah, I'm so sorry. You were there waiting and I could see you and I was like, oh no, I can't join. So thank you. And everyone that's on the chat, thank you so much for your patience. I was just doing, Suzanne, like a quick introduction, and I was just saying who you were and introducing Women Photograph and saying that you're part of a team that heads up like the London section, and how Women Photograph aim to elevate the voices of women and other non-binary storytellers, and that we're going to kind of have a bit of a mishmash of a conversation today and look at sexism and racism and your experiences and all of that. So yeah, sorry, how are you? And let's get started.
I'm all right.
Good.
Everybody's staring at me for about 15 minutes. I did a test yesterday and I didn't have combed hair, but now I've combed my hair, so okay. So yeah, I'm doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
And where do you think, I suppose there's so many places to start, isn't there, in terms of the discussion, particularly with everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, and how that draws attention, I suppose, to other voices in the industry and other voices and other concerns. So yeah, I suppose it's about, we were chatting, weren't we? We were saying it's about kind of creating long-term solutions and kind of not jumping on bandwagons and making something, sharing experiences and just kind of lifting each other up. So I don't know if you want to start talking about the stuff that you do at Women Photograph, or your experience and like sexism and like the power of being together as women and that underrepresentation in the industries.
Yeah. So all of it. I'll just start with
Yeah,
that.
all of it. Yeah.
Well, I could start with Women Photograph, kind of the history of it. It was started in 2017 by a photographer named Daniela Zolkman, and she was just tired of hearing from editors that they would hire women, but they didn't know any. And so I think, after hearing that numerous times, she put together this list and made a website that just had a list, more or less, with a thumbnail of different photographs, which is kind of what you see today. And websites connecting you to photographers around the world. And I think it started with 400, and now it's well over 1,000. And
Okay, wow.
then there was also a Facebook group. I think the private Facebook group has maybe 900 members now, and they just realized it was a bit unwieldy, so they've broken into chapters as well, because there's so many people in the different countries around the world that also want to be part of it.
Yeah.
And so I had kind of been running a little sort of ad hoc Facebook group. Once I left, once I went freelance, I had a little bit more time and started this sort of UK women photography Facebook group, just kind of so that we could support each other. I've found sometimes when you're on the certain Facebook groups some of them can be quite sexist. Some of them, the minute you ask a question, you get a really kind of patronizing response, as if you hadn't, I've been in the industry for over 20 years and I'll get a response. Am I on? Okay, I'm back.
You're back. It's okay. We lost you for a second there, but you're back.
That's all right. And so I'd get a sort of a patronizing response, and I just thought, let's just see what it's like, started one just for the UK. And it was great. We had loads of members. And then as soon as sort of Daniela started the chapters, I was like, ooh, I want to be involved in that. So myself and Betty Laura Zapata, we kind of headed up the London chapter. And this was just in October, just in 2019. And I think we managed to meet about 5 times in person. And since the lockdown, we've had 3 Zoom calls. And sort of, different editors will come in and do Q&As. And, we've got the Facebook group. We'd love to have a different, platform as everyone, some people have issues with Facebook, but we try to send out a letter kind of, to everybody on email once a month, just about what's going on and, maybe what our meetup is. But it really is to kind of have a safe space so people, maybe even especially young photographers that want advice and don't want to be sort of talked down to, can go and feel feel okay.
Well, I think it's about that. It's about sharing knowledge, isn't it? Because I think, have you found that, I mean, I've been a commercial photographer for 11 years and um, kind of, it's definitely improved, or there's definitely more women in the industry, but I'm straight away, people will ask me, if I say I'm a photographer, most people, some women, but very few, basically it's men, will assume, like straight away assume that I'm either a baby and family photographer or a wedding photographer. And I think that's because of my gender. They wouldn't say that otherwise. So have you seen a shift in the industry in the last couple of years in terms of, I mean, there's groups like the F22 via the AOP, because it's something that gets talked about, isn't it? And then it kind of comes in waves, I suppose. And yeah, I didn't know if you'd seen a shift in the industry in the last couple of years in terms of sexism and working with women photograph.
Well, it's funny because sort of when I was on the street, I was a wire photographer, and you know, I think every single day I dealt with it, but I just absorbed a lot of comments and things because it was just daily. And so since I've been freelance, I'm kind of more in my little bubble, and I've surrounded myself with many more women photographers because, you know, working for an agency, there are not many women. There's, at the time I left, there was 5 female staff photographers worldwide for Reuters, and they had over 500. So it was kind of, you know, it was always hovering around 1% of their female photographers were the staff photographers are female. So I never really felt like I had an ally. I never felt like, you know, I had someone, a mentor that I could look up to and that would help me in that industry. And so, and since, you know, I mean, I feel like my shift, I've noticed many more groups, many more people are kind of, you know, talking about it. A lot of the kind of terms that we use, especially, well, I've noticed it with kind of the Black Lives Matter movement, terms like, you know, gender parity and, I don't know, well, with Black Lives Matter, like, you know, white privilege or unconscious bias, those kind of words aren't seen as so foreign anymore. They're kind of academic terms that are becoming more and more common. And I think that these things can only help the cause because they're talking out against, if I had said anything about sort of, you know, being a feminist while I was standing on Downing Street, you know, with my colleagues, I would have just been kind of shouted out. And I think I was just so beaten down that I didn't sort of say anything. But I think when we spoke the other day, you know, there was that comment you get all the time of sort of, you know, ooh, like your long lens.
I know.
You know?
It's crazy that I still get that. It's like, guys, come on.
I don't know if men get that. I'm not sure. And there's, you know,
I don't
the
think
other
so.
time.
Men do get that. I don't think so. I don't think. But I think you're right about the language. I think the current discourse really opens the doors for other issues on inequality, doesn't it? And the normalization of the language that is being used. I kind of want to say that it's really important because it removes it from the realm of those people who are really political or are only educated to a certain level or only work in these groups. Because, I mean, I thought I was relatively knowledgeable on kind of women's rights and like consideration of sexism in the industry and equally racism. And actually it's really embarrassing to realise.
I know
I
what
mean,
you
we're
mean.
the wrong people to have a discussion about racism, right? Because we're both white, but it's we can talk about sexism and as women in the industry and the underrepresentation there, and even there, it's kind of embarrassing to understand like how lacking in knowledge I was. And actually, I think that's why I've been so uplifted to learn of groups like this and like the Photojournalism Hub. And because photojournalism particularly is seen as one of those things that, oh, you're going to the war, you know, you're going to the front lines, like you know, it's not women's work. And I know that that's kind of a really old kind of turn of phrase, and that there are plenty of women photojournalists out there. But like you said, you were working on that level and still experiencing sexism.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like sorry, I was going to say with the you know, it's not women's work, kind of people going to war, that sort of thing. It's because we're so used to seeing kind of things through the male gaze, and we're used to seeing,
Yeah.
you know, that, and so that is what becomes what's good photography. And, you know, you send a woman into war, and, you know, obviously they'll be trained to take certain types of pictures because that's what people want, but there's also so many different ways that you can tell a story. I mean, I remember getting sent into Afghanistan in 2002, and my editor, photo editor, said, "Oh, we've got to get somebody in because nobody's getting any pictures of the women of Afghanistan. So you go in and do that." And, you know, where I was, that's great, but I think it felt like ticking a box, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to say, actually, have you got any like, that's what's maybe quite interesting to hear about, is your own experiences of working within the industry as a photojournalist or a documentary photographer, and with other women within women photograph, and the experiences that you've had, and the kind of sleight of hand sexist comments, like people say to me, like, "Oh, that's a big lens," and you kind of, it floats over your head, and then you realize, like, hang on a minute, actually, like, would you say
Yeah,
that?
it's
So
hard
yeah.
because I feel like I absorbed I absorbed so much of it that I kind of was really trying to think of some of the comments, and I think because they just became okay almost. And I
Yeah.
think the fear of actually saying anything, I think I shied away for years from getting into a debate because I didn't know how to debate it, you know.
Yeah.
There's very, you know, there's all these statistics about I've got one here about
Yeah.
you know, how women who leave university with degrees, you know, it's generally 50-50 gender split of students learning cinematography and photography, and the women don't actually make a transition into the industry. So
Yeah.
the AOP says that 18% of their accredited and assisting photographers are female. 12% of the BPPA, which is the British Press Photographers Association, are women, and the NUJ, National Union of Journalists, says that 16% of their members are women, which, you know, where are they going? And generally I don't have an answer, or didn't have an answer as to why, and so I just would kind of not say anything. And I would just sort of continue absorbing these, you know, comments just to get through the day and just almost try to fit in. You know, I used to sort of dress like a man. I'd try to, you know, just look like them and talk like them. And I felt like I had dual personalities. Sometimes I'd, you know, be sort of talking and just really trash talking. And then, you know, I'd have to jump in after my shift and go pick up my daughter at nursery and suddenly become like, "Oh, hello," you know, "I'm Lovely." And, you know, it was a real dance, I think.
Yeah.
But I think now as women become more part of the industry, we don't have to do that. We can be ourselves, hopefully, and continue to. And by having support networks like Women Photograph, we can kind of build each other up and know that it's fine. It's okay to kind of, you know, cover the types of stories you want to cover. It's not, you know, soft journalism, and we can do hard journalism as well. We can go to war, we can do, you know, anything, but have our gaze on it, as well as having, you know, in addition to the female gaze, have the Black gaze, you know, have that looking into, you know, covering the protests. There's been lots and lots of lists that have been made about, you know, naming Black photographers, because, you know, everyone is publishing photographs by white male photographers. And, you know, if they're not getting the chance, then, you know, what are we going to do? So, you know, making it easy for editors, you know, by just saying, "Here you go, here's a list. Go
Yeah,
for
we're
it."
pulling on those resources, I suppose, because there's a lot of photographers and other bodies sharing lists at the moment, isn't there, of photographers who are covering. And I know that Women Photograph have, you've got a couple of ladies on your BAME photographers on your site who are covering some of the protests. And actually, I'll share some of that imagery after.
Yeah, Davina James in particular, she's up in Birmingham. She's, you know, been photographing those protests. And then next week, or no, starting tomorrow, we've got a group of women photographers that are going to be showing us all different facets of the photography. The UK Black female photographers group, and they've really put a lot of work into their posts and things. So it should be fun if you follow the Photograph London Instagram page, and definitely look at the stories because they've got some fun things in store. I'm excited about it.
It's good to see, and I think that like you mentioned yesterday when we were talking about that we've got to be really careful not to like parachute photographers. I love that phrase that you used then, parachute photographers into situations, and that we've got to be a lot more considerate about how that is dealt with. And even though that's something that maybe people thought they were doing before, and now it's kind of actually in hindsight you can go, well, actually that was still not as considerate as I could have been of that situation. I don't know if that, I don't want to like compare racism and sexism, but maybe there's guys out there as well, or who kind of go, oh yeah, that was a sexist way of dealing with that. So I suppose it's part of that change, isn't it?
You mean dealing with by parachuting photographers into conversation?
Yeah.
Because I think it's because editors might not have relationships built up with local people, and they're just used to using their photographer and throwing them out there and knowing that they can, you know, send the pictures back. And you know, I think under deadline, they're under a lot of pressure. But I do think it's really important to try to figure out ways of getting to know other photographers, getting to know photographers in other places, you know, because, you know, training them, taking the time to like, you know, give them the, you know, resources they need. It's not, you know, most people now can file pictures and they have an idea. It's not sort of this, I mean, I think it used to be kind of a mysterious task that we had, you know, back when I worked in film, and we'd be carrying around, you know, film scanners or, you know, things to send back pictures. But, you know, nowadays, most people do it, you know, I mean, most pictures from, you know, I mean, every single person armed with a phone now can kind of, you know, do beautiful photographs. But I think partly, I mean, there used to be sort of many more Western photographers that would get sent to other countries to kind of head up photo departments, you know, and I'm also part of that. I was the chief photographer in Indonesia for 3 years, kind of in 2003, 2005. And, you know, I mean, I couldn't have done my job without the network that the photographer before me had set up. And then also sort of the number 2 guy in command is this brilliant photographer named Dita Alankara. And he, you know, I couldn't have done anything. He, you know, immediately I'd have to call him and say, who do we send? I don't know anybody in, you know, Sulawesi. And he just had it. And so, you know, when I left, he got my job, and that is how it should be. It really should be, you know, whether we need to train people up to the, you know, the agency's style, but, you know, most of the photographers there really are completely capable.
Yeah, and it's kind of, because it's not, we were talking about threats, weren't we, and how maybe certain parts of the industry feel threatened by, you know, like male photographers feeling threatened by female photographers. And it's kind of, I suppose that's what it's about. It's about removing that threat and kind of going, come on, this isn't like, this is now, we need to, COVID has given us the opportunity to reflect somewhat, hasn't it? And has maybe made us more kind of empathetic. Empathetic is the wrong word, but just more considerate and more reflective on what's going on around us and the social discourse and everything. And maybe that's made it easier to have these sorts of conversations. And so maybe hopefully breaks down some of those threat barriers and allows stuff like that to happen. So allows editors to get contacts and make sure that people on the ground, like locals, are being employed to do the work that they can do, and female photographers are getting the jobs that otherwise they wouldn't, and BAME photographers are getting the jobs that otherwise they wouldn't. Because I was saying yesterday that I'd never really appreciated, like, I think about the offhand sexist comments that I've got, and then I think, wow, if you're a black female, that's like just amplified massively, and I can't even begin to understand. I can appreciate, but I can't even begin to understand that. So it's kind of, it's so many parts of the industry, isn't it? It's kind of such a broad spectrum of kind of, where do you kind of start this education? Where do you start feeding this in? I suppose it's, you just start somewhere, you start the conversation somewhere, and then you hope that people are willing to take that and continue to educate themselves and share. Do you think?
Yeah. Well, I would hope that, you know, if photo editors now are sort of scrambling to, because they, you know, maybe they'll feel more open about asking. I mean, I had I well, it starts with a sexist story where I was on the staff.
We like a sexist story. Yeah.
I was working on a staff of, at the time, I think it was 4 or 5 photographers, and they were all men apart from me. And every so often when we were down an editor on the desk, they would call a photographer in to kind of, answer phones. And it was always me. I always had to go in and be the person that answered phones. And I was always going, why don't you send the guys in to do this? It was so frustrating. Yeah. So I got to kind of, be a fly on the wall in the newsroom and just saw some really horrible, horrible behavior. And, where I think there's a lot of scared men that don't know how to ask the questions, and they know they're given all the sort of diversity training with their companies and ticking those boxes, but they don't know how to continue it. They know they can't say things, and then they might even nervously kind of laugh about it being not PC, or trying to catch it, but not actually sort of doing the work they need to do to find these photographers. I've had photo editors sort of I've overheard them sort of okay, we have no black journalists, can somebody find me a Muslim woman in Birmingham, and but they'll just shout it, and then everyone will laugh, and then they'll put their head down, and I'd be like, you can't say that, like.
Exactly. And it's astonishing, really, it astounds me. It genuinely astounds me that we're even still having this conversation. I mean, and it shouldn't, should it? It should.
Right.
Maybe it seems stupid that it astounds me, but part of me is like, why are we having this conversation?
I know.
And then you kind of reflect back and go, oh yeah, that's because actually that comment that I received, or this is happening, or this is happening. It's kind of, it's crazy.
And it's so wrapped up, even sort of, that the comment about the Muslim woman, it's like, thinking that only a Muslim woman could tell a Muslim woman's story, or only a woman could tell a woman's story, or advising Muslim women. I think there was something I saw on Twitter that UAL had posted about, tutors kind of advising their students, saying, oh, if you're Muslim, why don't you photograph the Muslim community? And, maybe Muslim women photographers want to photograph nature, maybe they want to photograph food. Like, why are we pigeonholing people into that? And so sort of black photographers are only thought of now for the, but no, we should be thinking about them for shooting sports. We should be, there's a wonderful sports photographer, and Elsie Kabui, who's in our group, and she is obsessed with rugby, and she wants to, shoot rugby. And, why is she not, shooting it? And she's really good. But it's just
I know.
Hard to get in. I mean, I've kind of had to shoot football on the sidelines, and the first football match I ever shot, soccer to the Americans, is when I showed up. I didn't really know much about it. I'd shot lots of sports, so I could kind of find my way. But I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter, and kind of showed up to this tiny little press room at Tottenham. And I just remember everybody's neck just completely craned, who is this? And I sort of toddled in with my gear, and I just, nobody sort of made room for me. And here, I'm a pregnant photographer. I was, and I just was like, well, no, I'm not going to ask for anything. I'm just going to, do my job. And I did feel like I'm going to pretend like I'm not pregnant. I'm going to do this. And it ended up that one of the players fell over the boards right into my lap during the match. And everybody was all concerned suddenly then. But, it took me a really long time of just sitting on the sidelines, or on the side of the pitch shooting before anyone would talk to me even, and it's frustrating. And so I can't even imagine how frustrating it must be being black on top of that. I can't even.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And actually, we just had a question in, and I know this is something that we kind of vaguely touched on before, and actually I know has been discussed before in the industry, but about competitions and about the lack of women and the lack of diversity of people entering competitions, and whether that has to do with a confidence thing, but also the lack of judges on the lack of diversity in terms of judges on competitions. So I didn't know if you had any kind of closing last thoughts on that or anything.
Well, if you do look at sort of, the judging panels of many of the competitions, is it the Editors Guild, UK Editors Guild, the I'm trying to think of, sorry, I don't have my right notes, but
it's
they are primarily white, and there's barely, you know, there's barely any you know, ethnically diverse faces. There's you know, if you look at sort of the ambassadors program for Nikon or Canon or Sony, it is primarily white men. Nikon in particular, I saw something the other day about how they do not have one black person on their ambassadors program. And so, you know, and they're the ones that really are people that you look up to. But with contests, you know, people say, oh, well, they're judging blind, but there is an argument for a certain type of picture is lauded in many of these competitions. And it's a certain type of picture that male photographers shoot, and it's become sort of what we look at. And, you know, if we go through, you know, the education system and sort of, you know, look at the history of photography, you know, when I was in school, when I went to university and learned about it, it was all white men. And I never thought anything about it. And, you know, still today, that curriculum is very similar. But, you know, and I teach some photojournalism classes, and I make a point to just reverse that and show as many females and as many, you know, black photographers, Chinese photographers from all over. And, you know, it isn't all about Cartier-Bresson, you know. I mean, he was a great master, but, you know.
And I suppose that's why it's changing, isn't it? Because we can't change the past, and we can't change the fact that it has always been a male gaze, I suppose. But it's about changing that now, isn't it? And it's about more women, more BAME photographers entering competitions or trying to do that sort of thing, and us being more open about that so that we can change that narrative. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. And I think that's what it's about, isn't it? It's not about quick, fast, like, let's just shout about this now. It's about making long-term changes about gender bias in photography competitions, and keep fighting that fight, because this is a discussion that's come up before. And I mean, I know that we had a chat, and you said that you wrote an open letter when you just asked a question, and how that was met with resistance when all you did was ask a question.
We just asked why there wasn't, you know, much diversity in a photo competition. It wasn't really a competition, it was more of they were going to have a gallery show, and and it was 6% of the pictures chosen were women. And, you know, when you look at it, the percentage of women that entered weren't many, but it wasn't about that. It was more about, what are you going to do to increase diversity within your organization? And, you know, the response was so defensive and angry, and as if we had hurt. They became the victims, and it became kind of a little Twitter storm, you know, my little bubble. But it, you know, became this sort of thing of, you know, that we were the oppressors suddenly, just asking the question. And, you know, it's not that we're telling white men, you have to give up your jobs, you have to give up all your work to us. It is just like, educate yourself, learn about it, see something from a different perspective. You know, and you know, by helping someone, I mean, I think the tide is going to turn where, you know, no one's going to want to give work to people who act like that, you know. That, you know, if you're somebody, I mean, as a white man right now, what you can do is, like, you know, find somebody to mentor, find someone to, you know, to talk about it, really try to, like, look at it, help somebody, loan some equipment if you've got extra, you know, do something like that, you know. And, you know, you'll be seen. I mean, not don't do it for them, but I just, you know, really understand it. And then, you know, that it's only going to help you. Really. Don't fight it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, you know, people like you and support groups like Women Photograph work, because it's about sharing that education, and it's about, you know, people taking their own positive steps to educate themselves, and also larger corporations and companies and museums and art galleries and groups also stepping forward. So it's about us each stepping forward and going, come on guys, what can we do to help each other and support each other? And like we said before, kind of making you know, you have to be careful with language, and I think it's about making it more accessible, and kind of hopefully that will do that. And hopefully the conversation around Black Lives Matter, the increasing conversation around sexism and gender equality in the industry, and also COVID and how that's made us more reflective, and more people are kind of maybe think about imagery in a different way, or we're absorbing imagery, we're absorbing a lot more imagery, aren't we? So I think it's maybe the increased exposure to that will change our relationship with it, and then ultimately change our relationship to the social discourse that's happening around it. So
But it is up to all of us, you know. I mean, it's it's not women's jobs to combat, you know, diversity, just as it isn't a Black person's job to educate everybody. We all need to be, everyone needs to learn about this and needs to help, you know, help each other.
Yeah, and I think I like that. That's a great end. I think that's so true. So is there anything before we end our chat? Thank you very much to everyone that's been joining and sending in your questions. And is there anything, Suzanne, that you want to share as a closing word, or do you want to remind us of your Instagram handle or the Women Photograph website or anything just before we go?
Yeah, well, we're at Women Photograph London. There's also at Women Photograph, which is the international group. Both of those, you know, follow those. We're on Twitter, and we do have and if you get in contact with us, you know, via messaging, you can direct message us, and I can give you information on, you know, our email if you want to discuss anything, or, you know, get more information on joining. We're open to more members.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you for, I mean, I could chat to you all day, especially about experiences within the industry and your experience as a female photojournalist. So yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and thank you to everyone who joined for the talk.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, take care. Have a really great day. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.